directly, tangentially involved in similar questions. I'm super keen to hear your reactions, comments as we go through this. And my intention is today to get a conversation started and hopefully create many, many more forums for different parts of the, I guess, economic ecosystem to speak to each other as we work towards a more sustainable world. And as the SDG theme, so today I really want to put on two hats as we speak. One is as a member within the VNR SDG theme. And the second is as a trainer for the SDG Impact Standards. So those are my intentions. And my hope is, as I mentioned, the beginning of a conversation, and then see what, as a community, how could we be involved with some of these ideas. And all questions are welcome. I know Randika mentioned a Q&A session in the end. We can certainly do that. And as we go on, please feel free to just put up the raise hand sign, and I will come to you. Otherwise, I'll make a note and we can do the Q&A later. All right. So I think many of you may have met me. I may have met you. If not, I am entrepreneurial, and I've always worked in the business, corporate, for-profit world. Over the years, I've transitioned my work more towards evaluation. And I practice it in different ways through my company, through the ROI Institute, which does program evaluation and impact evaluation within closed systems. I also run an impact accelerator program with my university, which is Columbia. That's purely voluntary because it's just giving back to our community. And then, of course, I work with you guys and a couple of other places. So overall, the purpose where I want to take my life is to combine the different discussions that startups are having, and perhaps policymakers are having, and perhaps corporations are having, and kind of see how to bridge the gaps, how to bridge some of the thoughts and ideas. And this is something that the SDG Impact Standards are also designed to do, which is really create a common discussion mechanism and language amongst different ecosystem players, because everyone gets affected by how the world does. So before I begin, and I want to open up with a very simple question, which is, and please, you could chat in, you could just speak. I'd love to know. When we say sustainability, it's thrown around this word everywhere all the time. What does it mean to you? And anyone can speak. What does it mean to you?
Feel free to unmute and respond, or you can raise your hand here and then we can call you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please. What I think is sustainability means whatever intervention we do, the whatever outcomes produce due to that intervention should go on even beyond the either project program intervention.
Yeah. So this idea that something should go on beyond a certain point. Yeah, thank you. For some reason, I couldn't see your name, but I think that's my setting. But thank you very, very much for that comment. What else would people add to that? Okay, Puncho is saying it's intergenerational. Yes. So this idea that this goes not just beyond this moment, but perhaps something that goes beyond our generations. Sure. What else would you add? Okay, so here in the context of the SDG Impact Standards and sustainability, in terms of the wellness of planet and people, it's simply defined as development or a way of life which meets the needs of today without compromising the ability of our future generations to meet their own needs. So I think that comment on intergenerational is very, very relevant. And also the comment that is something that continues, we don't run out. So the reason I wanted to put this up front is so that we can all see when we say sustainability, what is it that we are talking about? Development that holds together, not just for us, but for the generations that come after us. Okay, one other question. What about impact? How would you define impact? And there are many different answers to this. So I mean, certainly no right answers, but I'll share with you how we would define it in this context. But what is impact? Randika, what about you? How would you define impact?
Good one. So I would say what difference it makes, you know, the difference.
Something that makes a difference. Wonderful. What else? Change. So Mohib saying change. Yes, this concept of something is different, something has changed. Yeah. What else?
May mga games. Nakaka-stress. Hindi ako mahilig sa mga games. Ikot ako tsaka nakakapagod. Unlike yung mga nauna, nire-revelation kami doon.
Sorry, Randika, am I missing something or?
Can everyone be muted, please? Madhuka, can you mute people, please?
Okay. So all right. So in view of time, let's just see how, in the context of the SDG Impact Standards, how impact is defined, and it captures this essence of change and consequence. It's the consequence of our actions, and in particular, in this context, we say consequence on aspects of well-being, right? And well-being specifically is economic, social, or environmental. But impacts can be good, they can be bad, they can be intentional, they can be completely unintended, they can be direct. So something we're doing for our customers, our patients, our people we directly deal with. They can be indirect, people we are not necessarily aware of getting affected by it. So impact, therefore, is something that, at least in the business world, sometimes we don't necessarily understand as having that many dimensions. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about sustainability and impact, let me just talk about a little bit about the objectives for this quick little session we're having. What I hope to do today is introduce to you the SDG Impact Standards. It basically, at the end of the session, it should be, I hope I would have given some clarity on what they are, who they are for, how do they put together, how do they stand out, if at all, in the sustainability landscape, which is very crowded, and what kind of things do they say? And if there is time, I'd love to get your sense for how we could engage with them. And the discussion, so to get to these objectives, our discussion agenda is very simple. Some of the key concepts, which we already started talking about, such as what is sustainability, what is impact. And then we'll talk a little bit about the global context. Why is there an urgency right now to do things differently? And then we'll talk a little about a new idea, at least in the private sector, which is how do we manage for impact rather than manage for profits only. And then I'll show you some resources and then what the standards look like. That's just our agenda for today. And all questions are welcome at all points. Okay, I know we haven't started, but before I start, I just want to get some chat answers. So this is very quick. I don't expect you to know the answers. I just want to get a sense of what you think this would be. The SDG Impact Standards are something that are required by regulation. Let me just let me have a very, very quick feel of what you'd say. Is it true or is it false? And since we haven't covered any of it, the answer doesn't matter, but I'm just curious. What would you say? SDG Impact Standards, what's your first impression when you hear it? Are they required by regulation? False. Yes, they're not. Okay, excellent. So let's look at the next one. These are reporting standards, external reporting standards. False, that is correct. They're not reporting standards. Excellent. And then these are meant for profit-making enterprises. That is also correct, Chinchuan. Thank you. They're not just meant for profit-making enterprises, they're meant for all enterprises. And in fact, there are standards for bond issuers and private equity funds, and also for donors and DFIs. And I'll actually, after this call, I'll share the links with you so you can get all the resources yourself. Okay, so that said, let's jump into it. Let me just get my cursor in the right place. Okay, so UNDP has put together several resources around making the SDGs real. Amongst these are SDG investor maps, which link at the national level SDG focus areas to opportunities for investments. And then also there are impact standards, which is really a set of voluntary guidelines for any entity to make sustainability central to the way they work. And making sustainability central to the way they work is actually a mindset, and it's a paradigm shift. And we'll talk about why that is. And today's discussion is really about the impact standards. Mentioned here also is the impact assurance and seal. These are future ideas currently in progress, but they're not yet fully widely available. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And the basis, as I mentioned, is why now? It has everything to do with the massive issues related to sustainability. Now, as we know, the global GDP is made up of many different players, right? There are government entities, and there's the private sector, and there's so many other ways we interact with each other. And just out of curiosity, on an average, how big is the private sector when we look at the global economy? What percent is it? Give or take, is it more than half, less than half? What would you guess, or what would you say? Or you could chat it in. It's about 60% of the global GDP. And this is important because when we look at some of the issues of the Sustainable Development Goals, it is very evident that these cannot be achieved without bringing in every single sector into this discussion. And this is why the standards are quite important for us to understand and maybe talk about as well with all parts of the economy, including the business, bond issuers, investors, and others. Now, some things that are happening in the background that we are familiar with, I want to just mention here so we understand the issues. Please, may I remind you to please mute your. Thank you so much. Okay, one of the things we do hear about is climate change and how difficult it is, and in fact, it is seen as probably the greatest danger or risk to global economic development. Now, when we look at it at a business level, societal level, these things are beginning to hurt, even at an economic level. So there was an article in S&P about how difficult it is for insurers now because of the unmitigated risks of the climate change patterns. So this basically the point here is that it's creating a level of pain that we have not seen before. Now, on the other hand, some of these issues are creating opportunities that we have not seen before either. So this is data from the IEA talking about the growth in the electric vehicles market. This is talking about opportunities available today because of issues related to sustainability and impact, because of issues related to climate, environment, etc. And it's just one other example of how organizations are responding to some of these is actually through the supply chain. And it's not uncommon anymore to see news like this, which is organizations such as Amazon and others will talk a lot about how they maintain their value chain, how they are focusing on sustainability by clearing up their value chain, which means not just the way they source, but how their suppliers source, how their suppliers are hiring, in effect, really looking at how those things are having an impact in terms of the sustainable goals, or basically sustainability issues. So with that backdrop in mind, what I wanted to really bring forward is this idea that sustainability is not just a thing that's happening to people. If we look at it in terms of economic movements and just the way business is done, it's a huge disruptor. It's a massive disruptor, as big as some of the other things we have seen. Now, because of that, there are new business models. There are new ways of engaging with stakeholders. There are new ways of looking at risk. And there are new ways of engaging customers, all of these amazing things. We can argue it's not happening fast enough, but the fact remains that a lot of new opportunities have opened up. A lot of new risks have opened up. Now, in response to this, a lot of organizations are doing things to address it. The question is, how should they do it? What actions can they take? And the actions is where the SDG Impact Standards come into play. In terms of businesses, or when we look at the private sector, the way they contribute to the agenda is actually quite simple, and in the way they do business. So for example, how can they develop products and services that are useful to stakeholders, not just shareholders? How can they focus on underserved markets? How can they think of new market opportunities given all the changes that are happening? And we do see all kinds of new businesses coming into play. Many of them may not be successful, but there are lots of new ideas. I think many of you probably also see new kinds of impact-focused businesses, but also bigger businesses changing the way they work, changing the way they reach out to their communities. And it's very interesting. And then, of course, there is this idea that they have to operate do anything that hurts people, but now the thinking has expanded to let's proactively and actively do things that make a difference toward the SDG. If I recap and say, where is the SDG Impact Standard trying to take organizations? Then there are 4 things, and I'll be very, very happy to talk a little bit about each of these. The first is that it's shifting a perspective which has been in the investment and in the business world for generations, which is a business's only or primary responsibilities toward the shareholder. And it's shifting this idea and saying, actually, no, a business or any entity has all stakeholders. So that's the first shift. The second shift is saying that instead of looking at sustainability issues or ESG issues or economic, social impacts on people in terms of what is the least I need to do to comply with the law, we need to start thinking about how can I make a difference? How can my business make a difference to the societies and the stakeholders that we work with? So that's the second shift that we hope to do. The third is very similar. Instead of thinking about the least possible, how can I run a business so I hurt nobody, to start to think about how can I benefit stakeholders, and then ultimately, how can I contribute towards better solutions for this SDG or this particular issue. And finally, we've seen this in the first round of when people started to talk about stakeholders and societies and communities. We saw a lot of companies with CSR teams. And that was a good beginning, but it's not, a CSR team is an add-on to, you do the business you do, and then you have a CSR team that talks about the community, that talks about sustainability, but things have changed. The next phase is to look at it in terms of ESG, and ESG is very similar to impact, but it's the difference is in ESG, your primary concern is the value of your shares or the value of your investment, the value of your asset, which is if I'm not careful in how I manage my sustainability risk, what will be the impact on my asset valuation? Whereas when we look at impact, we consider that, and we also say, well, what will be the impact on people and communities? So shifting, therefore, the thinking from, sustainability as an add-on through a CSR team to sustainability as something we do as a business. That's where it's going. So I'm just going to recap. One of the things I just spoke to you about is the reason to do this is such a big deal now is because of the massive scope of sustainability issues, and the mindset and the action shift it's trying to make are quite big, from CSR to SDG, from compliance to value addition, etc. And it's also introducing a whole different idea, which is quite complicated actually for many organizations, which is saying that just as we manage our financial systems, just as we manage our profits, let's find ways to manage our impacts. And that's an idea which doesn't come easily to business organizations, and I'm going to argue to many other organizations as well, because in part because of all the issues we know. It's not evident what trackers to look at. It's not evident how the changes have happened, etc. So before I go on, I want to touch upon this idea of reporting versus management. I know all of you are very seasoned in this field. How would you describe the difference between reporting and as a measurement for reporting and measurement for management? How would you describe the differences? Any difference? You could chat in or you could speak.
Yes, this reporting means something actually already produced or change recorded, whereas management is still within the hand of management team to produce the expected this change.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Yes, absolutely. Reporting is it's already happened. There's nothing we could do about this anymore. Whereas management gives us the power to do something about it, to actually manage for the impacts we're looking for. Thank you for that. What else? What else? Would anyone else add something else to this idea of the differences? Okay, as the chats are coming in, let's just talk about why this is very important when we look at organizations, whether it's for profit or other. So far, organizations, particularly with respect to sustainability, have taken the path of reporting. The mindset is, what do I have to report? And that's important. That's very important. However, what we are saying with the SDG Impact Standards is that's simply not going to be enough for some of the reasons that was just mentioned, right? So one of the purposes of putting the standards forward are to make it very obvious to our all stakeholders that impact is not going to just happen. It's certainly not going to be manageable if all we do is report at the end of 1 year. But instead, we have to start a way to bring it into our regular discussions. So one of the things, for example, is, we need to look at it differently. Our mindset should not be of compliance. It should be of ownership and accountability. And the moment which we just heard from Jung, actually, which is we need to be far more forward-looking rather than backward-looking. I think I've messed up a bit the data. I'm going to fix it and send you the slides later. But essentially, just having control over how we look at impact, even if impact as a concept seems very complicated to those who have not worked with it. So just really getting that DNA in place and getting started on that in our systems. So then if we were to do that, then sustainability, instead of a talking point, becomes something that organizations are actually able to work with. Great. So if all of this is done, then instead of this add-on, we are so sustainable, our organizations can actually be more sustainable. Instead of being simply aligned with the SDGs, they will be in a position to take action, so on and so forth. So then the question is, it sounds great, but how do the standards do that? How do they do that? So let's talk a little bit about what the standards are and how they're different, so we can get a sense of how they're trying to make this mindset, behavior, action change. All right. First, there are 4 sets of standards. There are standards for enterprises, which covers all kinds of enterprises, whether they're profit-making, non-profit, even governmental, public sector, doesn't matter. They're for enterprises. The second, there is a whole set for bond issuers. Third, they're for funds, private equity, and even venture capital funds. And fourth, along with OECD, it's for donors and DFIs. And what these standards do are they have common language. So everybody starts to talk about the same issues with the same language, and they can at least we can listen to each other and share vocabulary. And especially given some of these issues are worked across the aisle with completely different entities, that's a very important thing. The second thing is they help organize all kinds of frameworks. There's so much in this field. I don't know how all of you feel, but just listening to the alphabet soup letters, it's absolutely mind-boggling. And then something like the standards will help rationalize what is out there, what is relevant, and how to patch it together. And then it helps organizations assess the gaps that they have. So that's roughly what they do. These are available. These are absolutely available to everybody. I will send a link after this call to Randika and Madhuka, and maybe they could share it with you. But absolutely available to anybody who wants to. And in fact, any organization can do the self-assessment on their own. And so it's wonderful. Now, the whole idea then is, if we make it real, that means if we are going to make sustainability real and we are going to put it at the center of an organization's way of working rather than an add-on or a nice to have, then we need to get into the strategy. We need to get into how the management makes decisions, the transparency, which is, how they're reporting, and governance, which is, are they accountable to themselves and how good are they at that? And if we were to do that, we would certainly make progress towards the SDGs. And then, of course, other good things we should see which is better reporting, better disclosure, all of that. But the purpose is get people to act. Now, on this slide, I need to break down the slide for you because there are lots of blocks. But first, please watch with me the center of the page. And I don't know if you see my cursor, but if you do, at the very top here is something called high-level principles. So this is giving us a sense of the sustainability landscape, what is out there. In this sustainability landscape, there are high-level principles. And then please look at the very bottom of the center, external disclosure, which is all kinds of, how do I report? Do I use GRI? Do I use another SDG disclosure standards, etc.? Then the big issue was, well, how do I get from the high-level principles of UNEP FI and social value and GIN's core characteristics, how do I get from there to the disclosure requirements? Like, what do I do? Now, in between, there are all kinds and an expanding list of taxonomies and benchmarks, which is good, and different kinds of metrics, whether it's IRIS, whether it's BLAB, there's plenty. And then there is the big missing middle, which people are approaching in different ways. And these are decision-making frameworks. And in there are things like the UN guiding principles for business and human rights, etc. But squarely within that are the SDG Impact Standards. And their purpose is to take everything else that exists and create a coherent way for organizations to find their path to implementing the SDGs, essentially, as they go about running their business. So that's how they are designed. And when we look at specifically how they do this, it breaks down into two things. So in front of you is a map of the 12 action steps. So basically, the SDG Impact Standards provide 12 action steps for enterprise, a set of 12 action steps for private equity funds, similar for bonds, and also with the OECD. And these 12 action steps are broken into 4 areas: the strategy, the management approach, transparency, and governance, which is how is the board set up. And what they do together is put organizations step by step on a path to getting this done seriously. So for example, the very first step, if you're an enterprise, your very first step, if you were to go through this or take this up, is to start looking at your strategy and ask the question, well, I talk about sustainability, but what about my business strategy? Is it actually aligned? Are the SDGs properly brought in? Or any form of sustainability measure, have I factored that in the way I market, in the people I market to, in the way I source, etc.? And have I resourced it? So the very first step is then to really ask the most important question of how committed are we as an organization? Are we going to just do an add-on CSR, or are we going to take this pretty seriously and build this into our processes? And then the next step, which is understand, is really about materiality. There are 17 SDGs, and all organizations, and many of the bigger ones, are in multiple jurisdictions. And the question is, what is most material? How do I define it? How do I focus on it? And then how do I make sure to develop a response to the most material areas where we can make a difference, and most biggest areas where we can minimize risks that we create. And so this is the rough approach. Now, when we do a training around it, we go through it step by step by step. But here, this is what, so today my purpose is to show you what these steps look like. And I want to show you how these are connected to actual practice indicators as well. So the first step, just stepping back once again, is strategy, which is to make a commitment, figure out what's material, then design in the sustainability ideas into the actual business strategy. And companies will revise these on an ongoing basis, like the quarterly to some extent, or annually. And, so just make sure that gets done. And obviously you'd have to set goals. If you're going to put this in your strategy, then you're going to have to set goals, just as they set goals with their sales targets or market penetration targets. So that's how they would do it. And the next one is management approach, which is, okay, great. So you have a strategy document, but some companies may not look at that strategy document so much. What's happening on the ground? I mean, are your leaders making decisions based on that? So the management approach actually is then saying, let's make this real when we make a decision. Now, this particular part is, for me, a very interesting thing for evaluators and impact measurement professionals to look at, because this is where the standards say that, starting at number 7 and number 8, is that, look, you need to start finding ways to understand the impact you're having on all your stakeholders. So bring in the voices, start to look at it, and not just you need to look at it, you need to start making decisions based on the data you're seeing. This is a very uncomfortable discussion because, as you can imagine, this is real time. The data is it's not research level, right? So this is decision-making information as they go, but it's a huge change in what we are proposing for people to do. And this is one of the reasons I feel that a peers community, I really would like all of you to see this, and I hope in some shape or form get involved in this because so many of us are needed to help make this transition. I just really hope we can. Anyway, then moving on to from management approach is this idea of transparency. So at some point we need, as an organization, we report to somebody. What do we do? How do we present? And then most of all, governance. I mean, we say so many things, but are we accountable to ourselves? And is our board leading us by example? amongst other things. The next thing I want to show you is how, so there are 12 steps, motherhood and apple pie, how can we make them a little bit more real? And the way the standards do that is that they have a huge list of operating guiding principles and operating enterprise actions. So practice indicators. So what they do is for every single step, they have indicators that an organization can look at and start to work with. Now, if we really look at this, I think what the standards aim to do is to create a level of specificity that has not existed so far in the sustainability landscape. I don't know how well they've done it. This is fairly still new, and we are still exploring how organizations look at this and work with it. But it is a very different approach in how they've taken it on and how they have tried to map step by step. Now do this, now look at this, now look at these different standards, etc. And for every one of these, I've just put it here, but you can see that for every single one of these steps, action steps, there are practice indicators. So for example, I mentioned to you the IMM step 7, and you could see what they say: develop methodologies and process and system to assess, monitor, and manage impacts, right? They're not saying exactly which methods should be used here, but they are saying that that's got to be in place. So on and so forth, all the way for the 12 steps. Now, the exact same thing is available if you're a private equity fund. And as impact investments are growing massively, even though the funding for SDGs there's a gap, and in particular in developing countries, the gap is quite severe. Given all of that, still there is quite a lot of growth in impact investing. So private equity funds and VCs, if they're so aligned, can certainly look at these sets of guidance and action steps and take them on. I won't show you the great detail of all of this. I'll send you the link. Please have a look. And similarly for the bond issuer. Now, the way organizations are supposed to use it, they can read everything that's available. There is a self-assessment tool, which is an Excel spreadsheet, which lets them see what they should be doing and what they are doing. People actually, that work is getting more honed as we go on, because there is also an assessment standard that's being brought in place, which is not yet fully the assurance standard, voluntary assurance standard. But right now, an organization can do a gap analysis if they wanted to. And for every set of standards, if you were to go to the link, let's say enterprise, you'd see the standards, you'd see the self-assessment tool, and you'd see the guidance documents of how to use the practice indicators. So that's how they are set up. I have an example from Lenovo, which is UNDP's work with them, essentially saying that when they used it, it was useful for them. But essentially what they realized is that they need to bring it into their business. I'll send you the slides. You could have a look at this. In terms of what is next, when we look at the SDG Impact Standards, the hope is as organizations use these, and like I said, they're still very new, that not only will they bring it into their decision-making frameworks, but over time, they would be able to even create some kind of a minimum standard. And that is, with that, basically is an assurance framework that's being put in place, also voluntary. So once again, the SDG Impact Standards are voluntary. They are designed to work within the existing massive and complicated world of what's out there for sustainability. And they are intended to help organizations take concrete actions and know what to do when they say that, SDG 7 is important to me and the SDG 3 is important to me, etc. But then have a concrete way to get to those things. That's kind of where they are. And this is a little bit about assurance, but I won't go into that. Resources. Okay, so there are published resources. They are available to anyone. I'll make sure you get a link to that. In terms of what kind of other resources are available in terms of training, one of the requirements, at least for a train the trainer, is to do the IMM course on Coursera, which is a good course. If you haven't done it, I do recommend it, which is by Duke. That's the first thing on the left. The second thing is the training of the SDG Impact Standards that people like me do, which is the basically there are 2 or 3 things we do. One is it's a one-day high level, board level or senior executive level to think about, the big picture. And then there is a 2-3 day session which deep dives into the actions. And then people look at the gaps and self-assessments and kind of see where they need to go with it. And then to the right is what the UNDP does and SBI does, which is the train the trainer, which is, creating cohorts of people who can teach. And they're also working on the Assurer training program. And then they're working on the assurance itself. So that's kind of where we are. All right. I don't have much more to share because it's too much data and not enough time. And I didn't think it would be fair. I was just hoping to give you an overview. So I'd like to formally stop here. But before I formally stop here, may I ask you just a little question? Are the standards voluntary? You could chat. Yes, absolutely voluntary. Okay, next. Do they help organizations make sense of the sustainability? Well, they're supposed to. Are they supposed to help organizations make sense of the sustainability landscape? Yes, obviously, it's a silly question. And are they for internal decision making? Are they rather for internal decision making or external reporting? So rather for internal decision making. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to stop here. I see Romeo has a question. Are the mentioned standards established, produced as results of doing VNRs or through evaluation or from other sources? What are they for? VNRs or evaluations? Okay, I'm going to have to write this response back to Romeo and I'll share this with all of you. Yeah, they're not directly linked to VNRs at all, actually. There are guidance notes on how to prioritize based on the countries you're operating in, but I will respond back. So let me keep a note of that question. Are there other questions? Or comments? Please tell me it wasn't that boring.
So it was very interesting. And so, having worked a little bit on SDG 16 at some point and on some of the others, to see the thinking behind this, I still have to do a lot of work to fully understand this and to be able to sort of master it. But this is really a good start to see the level of thinking that has gone into this and the development of these tools for sustainability. And I'm actually very interested to know a little bit more about, for example, the case of Lenovo was very interesting, and would love to sort of read more about that or know more about that.
Okay.
And
sorry, Mohib, I'll send you some information on the Lenovo case after this one. Yeah.
Please do. And that's where my thinking, like the private sector engagement, as an economist, I know private sector is, with probably other purposes, but their sole purpose is profit maximization. And how do you do sort of SDGs or these SDG impact standards incentivize them to sort of combine these two? I mean, I understand the SRC part, like, there's a lot of government requirements, and there is the appetite of investors to invest in sort of ethical funds and sustainability funds and climate and environmental sort of friendly investment. But would love to know sort of where is sort of the the nexus or the relationship between that profit maximization and how they incorporate these standards and sort of action into sustainability?
Yeah, no, and that's an excellent question. Confounding and profound at the same time, right? So the SDG Impact Standards assume that you are an organization that cares of stakeholders, not just shareholders, which is essentially what you're saying is if you're merely profit maximizing, your focus is shareholder. Whereas if you are able to see your role as something more than just profit maximizing, but also profit maximizing, bearing in mind that your employees matter, don't make sure they don't burn out, that your societies matter, that the products you create matter, then the SDG impact standards are very helpful for you. Now they are voluntary, so they cannot impose in any shape or form on anyone, right? However, it's very evident when an organization would look at the very first step and decide who they're going to be. That's literally the commitment. The first step we begin with is the commitment, which is precisely this question: who are we going to be? Are we going to be only a profit maximizing organization, or are we going to be an organization that worries about more than that? And like you said, right now there is some regulation, more in the EU than in the US, and I think Singapore is pretty good as well. But equally, there is some noise in stakeholders. So there is a lot of noise around consumers caring, and I think they do. I don't know how much of an actual impact that's had on behavior, but there is some level of pressure for larger organizations to do things differently. There is some level of pressure through funding organizations who are being asked via regulators, etc., to do things differently. The impact standards, unfortunately, is not in a situation to put pressure, but they are absolutely in a situation to clarify and make it very clear where to go. I hope that helped. Okay, so there's a comment. They seem to be directed to private firms. Yes, actually, the same standards work for any enterprise. So perhaps I should have clarified. The reason I brought up private sector is in part because I tend to work more with the private sector, but the fact remains that they work with any organizations. They could work with a peers standards, like a way of working. So it's not relevant whether it's a private enterprise, whether it's profit-making enterprise, whether it's social or non-profit or government enterprise. The enterprise standards apply to everybody. I think that's Jules' comment. What is the anticipated achievement level of SDGs based on VNRs? I can't answer that question, Jang. I really don't know. In fact, when we were on a different forum, I didn't even think that VNRs now are evidence based. So I'm so sorry, I don't know how to answer that question. Or unless I misunderstood the question altogether. Are there other questions? Are there comments? Are there suggestions? If you do have suggestions and comments, I'd love to know. And I'd love to know, the one thing I do want to know is when you see your role, can you see a place for the SDG impact standards in your work or in the world around you? Do you see a place for it? If you do, what do you see? So this is probably my most important question to all of you. What do you see? Do you see a path? Do you see a use? Do you see a use case? Do you see a way to engage?
Just quickly on that one. I mean, as evaluators, what I'm thinking, and it's more coming from the clients, to be honest, than we being sort of, the sort of the carrier of this sort of sustainability, that sustainability has become almost a criteria for evaluators to look at programs and see, and programs, when we say this could be any programs, it could be a government trying to help private sector do something, or building infrastructure, or sort of all sorts of varieties of things. I myself haven't come across sort of evaluators measuring sustainability of a program, or measuring, but at the same time, we do report on sustainability as part of development programs from time to time, from evaluation to evaluation. Some evaluation more often than others. For example, infrastructure programs or large capital investment programs. Then it will be, for example, in a service delivery type programs. And I do remember, I think it was ALNAP, the humanitarian, they set the standard for humanitarian evaluation. And I also remember the OECD DAC criteria discussions included discussion around sustainability, in the sense that, how we do things and how they impact future resource use.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I see a clear sort of relation from what we heard here to evaluation, and then people who are doing program evaluation. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. And then I see in the chat, Chinchun has a comment on the social impact field to convince funders, yes, or goes to, and what impact they're creating with the funds. Yes, absolutely, that would be very powerful. Yeah, and then Chunk, you have a comment. SDGs are theoretically internalized. Yes. Yes, so this is very interesting. So when I guess you're looking at it at a national level or a macro level, that it's theoretical, but very difficult to localize and report and make real. And I think this replicates at the micro level, at the entity level as well, which is why I think this, if we can get the approach at the grassroots level, starting with all kinds of organizations to look at things differently, would be helpful. But this gap is very real. All right. So I would just love it if anyone has questions or comments or suggestions, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from all of you. I'd love to get your advice. I'd love to brainstorm with you about how this work can be expanded and how we can make this SDG thing real at national levels and also micro levels. And just in general, just really grateful for your time today. I don't have anything more to say.
Okay, if no more questions, thank you very much, Nidita, for a very good engaging session. And since one of the goals of the theme is to promote VNR and build capacity in the region, so thank you for your work. And as Nidita mentioned, everyone, Madhuka will share the slides and also the recording of this training. So until next time. We'll see you all. And actually, just to remind you all, we have a webinar which is on the Mongolia Evaluation Association's annual report, where you can learn some lessons. So it will be held on this coming Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. IST. So until that, see you all next time. So I would suggest our VNR team members to stay behind for a quick